Hey everybody, this is Kelsey.
And this is Reese.
And you're listening to Charismatic Megafauna. All right, everybody. Today we are talking about one of my favorite things, which is birds.
Birds.
We're going to touch a little bit on why crows and other corvids are absolutely amazing. And then for our main topic, I'm going to talk about my favorite type of birds, which are raptors.
Yeah, right. They're very clever, from what I understand.
The corvids?
You know I mean raptors.
Which is funny because corvids are way smarter than raptors.
Are they?
Yeah. Are you ready to learn all about it?
Yeah, tell me about it.
All right. What I learned this week is that there is a new, well, maybe the theme park isn't new, but there is a theme park in France that has unveiled 6 rooks, which are birds that are related to crows and ravens. They've introduced them into their park to help pick up trash.
Like clean up the trash in the park?
Clean up the trash in the park.
Not out of the bins, like from the sidewalk.
Yeah, picking up little pieces of paper and cigarette butts to help clean up the park.
How? Okay, explain. How do they do that?
Okay, well, first of all, we're going to talk about corvids in general. So if you don't know, corvid is the family that includes ravens and crows and rooks, birds that fall into that kind of grouping. And corvids in general are incredibly intelligent. Ravens have been noticed to mimic speech, so they can speak almost better, in some cases definitely better than parrot species.
Yeah, you've said that. That's crazy.
Yes. A little aside, one of my favorite stories about the job that I'm working currently is that we were at a zoo meeting with some of the animal trainers at the zoo, and one of the corvids, which I believe was an African pied crow, was standing in the corner cage and started talking to the member of my group who was at the back of the line, and the member at the back of the group could not figure out who was talking to him. He kept turning around and saying, "What?" And he, at that point, did not know that corvids can talk. So we had a good little laugh about him being unable to tell who was talking to him.
That's hilarious. Do you think that they do that just to mess with people?
Oh, absolutely. And we're going to talk more about why I think that's true.
That's awesome. These birds are growing on me.
Oh, yeah. So I someday will have a pet raven. I don't know.
Oh, really?
I don't know what's required in terms of getting the right permits for that. I don't know if maybe I can pick up one from the UK and just bring it back. And then it's cool because it's not a native species. It's an invasive species.
Yeah.
Or a non-native species, I should say. But I'm going to have one at some point.
I'm curious to hear what your husband has to say about this.
Yeah, we'll have to ask him.
Yeah.
Anyways, so not only can these birds mimic speech, they also mimic other noises like car alarms and just random things that they hear. But I think my favorite thing that they mimic is the sound of wolves howling or like fox calls to lure predators to a carcass that they can't get into. So let's say a deer has died, but it died of natural causes, so there isn't like a cut or anything, and the raven wants to eat parts of that deer. It will howl like a wolf to bring wolves to the site to rip open that body so that they can then dive in there and eat all kinds of crazy things from inside that deer.
Do the wolves not clean it out too much? Like they just kind of go for the main, like the meat, and the ravens go for kind of the leftovers, or what?
I think so, yeah. Ravens are primarily scavengers. And I think they only weigh about a pound. So there's no way that they need a whole lot of food to keep them going.
That's hilarious.
But yeah, not only can they speak, not only can they mimic sounds.
Yes, because we all know that's not the mark of intelligence.
Right. There are a lot of people who do a whole lot of speaking.
Yeah.
Without applying too much brain power.
Yeah.
No, these birds can solve complex food puzzles that require them to use tools. Reese, tools.
Like what sort of tools?
Well, I think my favorite, I have 2 favorites. We're going to talk about them both.
Craftsman and Black & Decker.
Exactly. No. My 2 favorites are they put a raven in a room, and then they put a worm that the raven would want to eat at the bottom of a jar filled with water, and they gave that raven a bunch of rocks. What the raven learned was that if it put bigger rocks into the water, it would cause the worm floating on the surface of the water to get higher and higher and higher to the point where they can reach it. So
That's nuts.
not only did it solve that problem, it was noticed to pick up large rocks because it understood that the larger the rock, the more water it will displace and the quicker it will get to the food.
That is insane.
The other cool experiment that people have done with ravens is they had 2 ravens that they put into a similar food puzzle, and they gave it a straight wire. They gave one a straight wire. They gave one a curved wire. And they had to use the wire to pull pieces of food out from underneath something maybe, or from inside of something. The first bird immediately picked up a wire. Now, these are birds who have never seen wires before. They don't know what they are. The first bird immediately picked up the curved wire and scooped out the piece of food. The second bird, Reese, are you listening?
Yeah, I'm sitting right here.
Are you listening?
Yeah.
The second bird picked up the straight piece of wire, without thinking, curved the end of it, and dug the food out from the food puzzle. They have such a strong grasp on how the world works.
Yeah.
More so than a lot of people, I think. They also can remember faces.
Really?
Yeah. And hold grudges. If there are people who are mean to them, they will swoop those people. They will not only swoop them themselves, they will alert all of their corvid buddies to come help swoop that person. I believe this was done in the UK as well, but these researchers put on a very specific mask and went out and captured a bunch of corvids so that they could analyze how their brains worked when they were doing certain things. And they went out in that specific mask, and then they released the birds when they were done. And every time they went out wearing that specific mask, thousands of birds would swoop at them. These crows got back up to help them.
How many did they capture in the
7. 7 birds who then told all of their crow buddies, hey, we gotta swoop and yell at this specific masked person.
That's awesome.
Now, they also will avoid places along their migration routes where crows have been killed in the past. So, like if a crow was shot down by a farmer over a small town in Wisconsin, and that small town is along the migration path, they will fly around that town or around that specific farmstead so that they don't get shot down again.
No kidding.
And in an Ontario town, they were attacking the town, essentially. They changed their migration pattern, and I want to say I read it was somewhere between 300 and 600,000 of them just landed in this tiny town and started probably pooping on everything.
Cawing.
Would
be my guess.
Just being classic corvids and being annoying. So the mayor declared war on the corvids, which is hilarious. That mayor is probably still so pleased that he was able to call war on a bird.
History. What is that? What would Ontario war on ravens entail? Like, what do they do?
You just wait.
Yeah.
They organized a sort of militia, a crow militia.
Uh-huh.
They went out and they shot one crow. One crow, and the rest of the crows knew immediately that this was not a good place to be. But they didn't stop visiting the town. Instead, they just fly just high enough that when farmers shoot into the air, it doesn't hit them. So they still fly over this town. They still poop on everything, but they're just out of the farmer's reach. But think about that. 600,000 crows knew after a farmer shot one that this wasn't a safe place to be. They are amazing birds.
Yeah.
All right, so I'm going to bring it back to the theme park in France because I went off on a bit of a tangent.
Yeah.
But like I mentioned, this theme park, they trained 6 rooks, 6 small crows, to pick up things like litter, like cigarettes, to help keep this park clean. Now, I think one of the more amazing parts of this is that they didn't train them to bring trash back to the handlers, because that was what I thought. It's like these handlers are just getting hundreds of cigarette butts a day.
Yeah, carrying giant trash bags.
Right.
And wearing the orange vests.
Right. No, they trained the birds to pick up trash and to bring it back into a trash can and then go to their trainers to get little treats for it.
No kidding.
They tried to trick them by picking up things like wood chips or small rocks to try and get treats. But they learned very quickly that if they do not provide the right thing, small bits of paper and, like I said, the cigarette butts, that they're not going to get a treat.
Wow, that's impressive.
It's super cool. I think my favorite thing, too, was said by maybe one of the trainers, maybe the leader of the theme park, I can't remember. But he said that they aren't firing anybody who's making sure the theme park stays clean. The point of the crows isn't entirely to make sure that the trash is getting picked up, but it's to function as human shamers. They're trying to shame people so that these people look and they see a crow picking up a cigarette butt and they think, well, I guess if a crow can do it, why can't I?
That's funny. Or maybe to immediately make the person feel guilty for littering in the first place.
It's a very French take on things.
Yeah. I just imagine, a bunch of ravens in berets, like striped shirts.
They're smoking the cigarettes.
Yeah. Just berating amusement park goers in French. I'd pay the admission just to see that.
Oh, yeah. But that's all I have to say about corvids today. I could go on and do a full long thing about corvids, but I just thought that this little bit of French paradise, where these corvids are getting paid with treats to shame humans into getting rid of their cigarette butts, was the silliest thing ever.
That's pretty cool. So what's our main topic this week, Kels?
Well, Reese, before we jump into our main topic, I just want to give a shout out to you, my wonderful co-host, for writing all the music for our podcast.
Oh. Well, thank you.
Reese does all of the editing and writes all of the music, which has really made the podcast sound like an actual thing and not like we're just laying, out like a French woman, speaking our minds.
Like paint me like one of your French girls?
Like paint me like one of your French girls. We're not laying like that most of the time.
Oh, stop.
But it really does add to make our podcast wonderful. So show him some love through any of our social medias because I know he'd appreciate that.
Stop. You're flattering me.
Anyways, our main topic for today is raptors. So for those of you who don't know, I am a naturalist and I work with training and doing presentations with raptors. So this is something that I have discussed a lot, which makes it a fun podcast topic because it means I can talk forever about it.
Yeah, and I've got to see you do some of these programs, a good amount of these programs, actually.
Right, so Reese is going to know some of the things I talk about.
Yeah, I could probably do the main topic myself if you want me to.
All right, let's give this a try. Reese.
No, I'm regretting this already.
Reese.
Yeah.
Where does the word raptor come from?
Oh, I'm going to guess from the Greek.
You're close. It's from the Latin.
Damn it.
The Latin language.
It was a 50-50 chance and I got it wrong.
You did.
All right, maybe you should take over from here.
So raptor comes from the Latin word, not the Greek word, rapare. Now, that basically just means seize or take by force. And that's going to refer to their talons. So these birds are really different from other hunting birds because they're going to use their feet to catch their food, whereas something like an egret is going to use their beak. Now, a talon is really just a claw. It's made out of the same thing as our fingernails, but it's a little bit different in that talons have a big bone that extends into them, and that helps to make the talon especially strong and especially good at grabbing onto things. Now, these do vary wildly across the raptor species because raptor is not a taxonomic group. So for those of you who don't know what that means, all animals are separated into groupings. So birds are in a class all their own. Mammals are in a class all their own.
This would come into like the genus species kind of a categorization, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
So all raptors are birds, but they are spread across many families. Now, I would love to talk about how each of them have different types of talons and how their feet are slightly variable. But first, I want to make sure that that's something that Reese actually wants to learn about today.
Yeah, of course. I'm along for the ride.
So, Reese, what is your favorite raptor?
My favorite raptor has to be the peregrine falcon.
The peregrine falcon.
Yeah,
Sweet.
awesome.
So peregrine falcons have long and skinny toes because peregrine falcons like to eat birds.
Yeah.
Now, their toes aren't going to be as strong as bigger hunters like eagles or even hawks because they knock their prey out in midair, or they knock them out of midair. They're going to eat
badass.
birds, but also bugs. Sometimes they'll eat bugs.
What kind of bugs?
Well, so small falcons, called American kestrels, will eat things like dragonflies.
Okay.
So pretty big bugs. But again, always flying animals. They're going to be eating other things that are flying around, and they're going to knock them out of the air. And then they're going to use their long toes to hold onto them while they fly to a location where they can safely eat it. Now, unlike something like a hawk or an eagle, who's going to use their really thick, really strong first two toes to squeeze the life out of something and hold on to it while they eat it alive, a falcon is going to use a very specialized thing on their beak to bite through the neck and basically incapacitate the animal that way.
That's like that little notch thing?
Yeah. We're going to talk about that little notch thing in just a second.
Is that not the scientific term for it?
That's always what I've called it. No, the little notch thing is called a tomial tooth, but we'll get into that in just a second.
Cool.
Now, Reese, can you think of a different type of raptor? We talked about hawks and eagles, and we talked about falcons.
Well, I'm going to go with vultures then.
Vultures.
Yeah.
Vultures are super cool, but vultures are frequently contested on whether or not they are raptors or are not raptors.
Really? Why?
Yeah. Well, vultures' feet, unlike other raptors, it's not very strong. They're not going to use their feet and their long talons really to rip things into pieces or to hold on to things. They use their beak a lot because they're carrion eaters. So they're eating things that are dead.
Scavengers.
They're scavengers, exactly. So their feet are just a little bit different from other raptors, but we consider them raptors, and they're pretty neat. So we can talk about vultures at a different point because, again, I can do a whole episode on vultures, and this is just our introduction to raptors.
Yeah.
So if you love to learn about raptors, keep coming back because I will always have little bits, little cool things about raptors.
If not, further episodes devoted entirely to raptors.
Exactly.
Probably, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Now, the last bird's feet that I want to talk about are owls.
Owls, that's right.
Now, owls have super cool feet. Most owls are going to have little feathers that go all the way to the tips of their toes up to where their talons meet. That's partially to help them fly almost completely silently while they're hunting. But I think it's partially to help keep them warm. In the winter, they tend to be more northern birds, and they'll stay in places like the northern Midwest all winter, so they need to be able to keep themselves warm. But they have a special third toe. So if you think of most raptors, they have 3 toes in the front and 1 toe in the back. That is true of owls, but their third toe can also rotate to the back so that they have 2 toes in the front and 2 toes in the back. Now, I was trying to figure out if scientists had an idea of why they might do this, and what I saw was so that they could maneuver and really squeeze their food to the point where they can just put the head in their mouth and swallow it whole. Something like a hawk or an eagle, like I mentioned, is going to hold on to something and just dismember it alive, whereas an owl is going to actually get something small enough that it can fit down its throat.
So the toe thing is like a maneuverability kind of like it's easier for them to grip the small rodents if they have that.
Yeah.
Would it be considered opposable? Probably not, right?
I think so.
Really?
I think I saw it referred to as opposable.
Okay.
I don't know the full definition of opposable, but we can call it that for our needs.
Feel free to mention in the comments any corrections you might have. As we iterated, I should say, in the first episode, we are not experts in any way.
No.
So if we're wrong, feel free to call us out on that.
And I think it's possible that a lot of what we say is BS. It's based in fact.
Well, speak for yourself.
Excuse me. Anyways, I want to bring it back to that tomial tooth that we were talking about.
Yeah.
Because our second raptorial adaptation that makes them different from other birds is the shape of their beak. So all of these raptors are going to have long, curved beaks. Sometimes you'll hear them called hooked, because they use that curved, hooked beak to rip off pieces that they can swallow whole. Now, this is different in the falcon family because they do have that extra notch on the beak called that tomial tooth that crunches through bones. So that's what they're going to use to break the neck of their prey, and then they're going to use the sharp points at the end to rip off small pieces. Now, in general, their beaks are really not, the beaks themselves are very strong, but the bite is very weak. I've been bit by our birds on occasion, and it has never even broken the skin.
Multiple occasions.
It's happened.
Yeah.
But their beaks or their bite power is so weak that they're not even going to carry things using their beak. If they need to move a carcass, if they need to move something that they've caught, they're going to grab it with their feet, and then they'll carry it over a distance. They really rely on their feet for the strength. Their beak is weak to the point where they have to use their neck muscles and their shoulder muscles to rip apart their food. If you just Google eagle eating something right now, like I'm sure there's a video of an eagle eating a duck or a red-tailed hawk eating a squirrel. You'll see that they're going to stand on that food and they're going to grab onto little pieces and rip them off.
You've used an analogy in programs as like the beak is, I think, the knife and the talons are the fork sort of thing.
Exactly.
Yeah, run me through that again.
So if we think of how we use a fork and a knife, we're going to put the fork into the food and then use the knife to cut off pieces that are small enough for us to put in our mouth and chew on. The raptors are going to do the same thing. They're going to use those feet to hold on to their food, and then they're going to grab onto a part that they think is small enough for them to eat with their beak, and they're going to rip off those pieces. It's a pretty gruesome life. If you're the prey of a raptor, you're not living your best life. Yeah. Now, the beak is really cool, but I think my favorite part of these birds is their eyes. Their eyesight is absolutely fantastic. And it's all slightly variable. So I'm actually going to split this into two groups. We're going to talk about nocturnal birds. And then we're going to talk about, Reese, what's the opposite of nocturnal?
Oh, it's going to kill me. Well, there's the one that's like at like half nocturnal and half in the daytime.
There is. Do you remember that word either?
Crepuscular?
That's exactly right.
Is that right?
So crepuscular is a bird that's active as the sun is rising and as the sun is setting. But do you know the word for a bird that is active only during the day?
I don't think I ever learned it.
That's okay. So I'm splitting this into nocturnal and diurnal.
Diurnal. No, I'm wrong. I definitely have heard you say that before. I just didn't know what you meant.
Yeah, so that's a fun reason for us to do this podcast. Reese is a great listener. He's always listening to what I'm saying. But is he truly understanding?
Okay, all right. Okay.
So I'm going to start with diurnal because they're a little less cool. With a diurnal bird, their eyes are incredibly large. On average, it's about 1.5 times larger than birds of the same weight. So let's say you have a chicken who weighs 2 pounds and you have a red-tailed hawk who weighs 2 pounds. The red-tailed hawk's eye is going to be about 1.5 times larger. Now, something like a kestrel, which is a small falcon, they only weigh about as much as a stick of butter. On average, they weigh between 100 and 130 grams.
It's a weird comparison.
I know, isn't it?
Is that like the standard measurement that they tell you to use?
Well, it's interesting because most people have held a stick of butter in their hand. They conceptually know how much a stick of butter weighs. So by saying a kestrel only weighs about as much of a stick of butter, people can sort of understand how much that is.
That's fair.
But even though they only weigh as much as a stick of butter, they're tiny. They stand about as large, a little bit smaller than something like a blue jay. They have 2 times the photoreceptors as humans do in their eyes. So they can see, if we're assigning a value to that, they might be able to see twice as well as we can.
Okay.
Something like an eagle, whose eyes are the same size as human eyes, they can see, or they have 5 times as many photoreceptors as we do.
That's nuts.
Yeah.
How would that translate into like the spectrum that they can see? I'd imagine they can see more colors than we can, or no? Is that?
So I don't know if they can see more colors, but they can see a wider variety of light. So a kestrel can actually, all birds can see ultraviolet light as well. So that's not something that we can see. But kestrels in Europe are the only birds that we've noticed who actually use that ability to hunt.
How do they do that?
We're going to take a little aside to talk about mice.
Yeah.
Which are deeply related to raptors.
Yes. As a food source.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Mice have good senses of smell, but they don't have great eyesight. So if there is a group of mice that needs to travel from one location to another, there is going to be a lead mouse who runs out, and every couple of steps that they take, they're going to pee a little bit. So think about a mouse, runs a couple of steps, it pees, its buddy behind him runs out, smells the little urine spot, pees a little bit itself. They're going to do that until they get into another safe space where they can regroup. What you should know is that urine has something called urea in it, and urea glows incredibly brightly under ultraviolet light. So if you are a kestrel and you are flying around, you can look down, and it almost looks like a Google Maps set up to lead you exactly to where those mice are hiding.
But can they see like what coffee shops are along the way?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
I don't know if they have that functionality yet.
Yeah, it's getting there. That's Gen 2.
Haha, we are still better than the kestrel.
Then get yeah, right. Yeah.
But that is a super cool adaptation that they've developed.
Is extremely cool.
So part of what helps them to be good hunters as well is that their eyes are shaped like tubes. So our eyes are spherical, but raptor eyes are long and cylindrical, and that creates a binocular vision for them. So that allows them to see further things, but also things in higher detail. Just like if we were to hold binoculars up to our eyes, we'd be able to see further.
Yeah.
Now, I've heard, and I can't find any scientific literature to back this up, so take this with a grain of salt, but I've heard that at 100 feet, a red-tailed hawk can see a mouse breathing. So not only can it spot it, it can see its body motion expanding and contracting with its breath.
That's crazy.
If that's true, that's amazing.
I guess it would make sense that would be the case if they can see it.
Right.
But that's just like a testament to the level of detail that they can see them in, or what?
Right.
Okay.
Now, the other thing that's super cool about this is that these birds have a higher frame rate than we do. So they can see at a higher frame rate. Humans, I've seen, can see anywhere between 10 and 30 frames per second. So if you think of a movie, movies typically run at 60 frames per second. So that is why to us it looks like solid motion. And I couldn't find any reliable information on an eagle's frame rate, but I do know that fluorescent lights, which if you don't know, the way that a fluorescent light saves energy is it flickers, but it flickers at a faster rate than human eyes can pick up. Now, we have noticed in captivity that eagles and other raptors get incredibly stressed out under fluorescent lights, and we couldn't figure out why for a long time. But I want to say it was about 10 years ago, somebody had this idea that the birds could actually see the light flickering. So imagine you're in a room and you're being rehabilitated, but it's a strobe light.
Yeah.
That's essentially what they were seeing. And what we know about fluorescent bulbs is that they flicker at a frame rate of about 120 frames per second. So that means that these birds, if we could put them in front of a movie and make them watch it, which they wouldn't, but it would just look like halting pictures over and over and over again.
What did you say? It was 70 frames for humans?
I want to say 10 to 30 is what I saw listed for what we can see per second, but most movies run at 60.
Okay.
Whereas these birds can see
at 120.
At least at 120.
That's crazy.
It's completely insane. If you run a raptor program, think about what kind of bulbs you have above them as well. This was something that our center had to learn the hard way. But once we figured it out, it did help to make our birds a lot more comfortable.
And also think about what movies you're showing at your centers.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Birds do not like The Godfather. Way too much strobe effect happening.
Yeah. And they don't like opera, so I'd imagine that's probably a deterrent.
Of course.
Yeah.
Anyways, in addition to the shape of the eye itself, many diurnal birds have a ridge over their eye, and I know the ridge has a name, but I cannot remember it, nor can I find it currently. But they have a ridge over their eye that helps to shade them while they're hunting. So it shades that eye from sunlight so that they can actually see other birds better or whatever they're hunting better.
There's one particular bird that you guys have that I'm thinking of that has the ridge that makes them look kind of cranky.
Yeah.
That's the one you're talking about, right?
Yeah.
Like the furrowed brow.
Exactly.
Sort of, yeah.
It looks like they're scowling at you. Now, birds like falcons take this even to another level. They will have that brow over their eye, so they look a little angry. But they also have what we call a malar stripe. So, Reese, do you remember what a malar stripe is? I feel like we've talked about this before.
Is that? I think we have. That's like what the football players and baseball players have, like the glare protection, right?
Right. So eye black that football and baseball players will put underneath their eyes to help them see a ball in a sunny stadium. I love to believe that they got that from falcons. All falcons that I can think of will have either a dark patch or a solid line underneath their eye. Because remember, falcons are bird eaters. They need to have that dark line to help them see things flying around when it's really sunny out. Now, on the flip side of these diurnal birds, we're going to switch to the nocturnal birds. Because nocturnal birds are amazing.
Yeah.
So nocturnal birds are going to be owls. Especially in the U.S., there are nocturnal birds everywhere, but in terms of nocturnal raptors, we're talking owls. Now, just like our first grouping, our diurnal birds, the average size of an owl's eye is almost 2.5 times larger than a bird of the same weight. So again, let's take a 1-pound chicken and a 1-pound owl. That owl's eyes are going to be 2.2 times larger than the chicken's eyes. Now, we're also going to talk about rods. Do you remember what rods do in the eye?
I feel like I should.
This is something that I can never get right. So in our eyes, we have rods and we have cones. One of them helps us to see when it's really bright out, or not really bright, but one of them helps us to see when we have adequate light, helps us to see detail. The other one helps us when it's really dark or in dim lighting. So the rods, please correct me if I'm wrong, I believe the rods are what helps us see in low light. Now, the average person has about 200,000 rods per square millimeter. So we have a lot of rods in our eyes. If you think about a square millimeter, it's not that much.
Yeah.
But the average owl has over 1 million rods
Holy
per square millimeter. That is amazing. That is absolutely insane.
You said these are the ones that help you see in low light.
Right.
Okay.
Exactly. Now, I think what's super amazing, so all of our raptors are going to have that tube-shaped eye. Owls are going to have more of a light bulb-shaped eye. So the back of the eye is going to be more bulbous. The part of the eye that's in the head is actually the largest part of an owl's eye. But that big bulb is what they need to house all of those rods, because that's a lot of rods. You got to have some space for all those rods.
Which has to mean that they must just have tiny little brains.
I hate to say it,
Yeah.
but yes.
So maybe not the greatest icon for like wisdom and knowledge.
No, I always get a kick out of that. People think owls are these old, wise creatures. And I hate to burst anybody's bubble, but man, can they be kind of stupid.
Yeah.
They are no corvid.
No.
They do their best. They're wonderful birds.
They're trying.
They're doing their best.
Yeah.
But their eyesight is far superior. What they lack in brain power, they make up for in eye power. Now, they have, I want to say it's something like 2 times better, maybe, vision than your average diurnal raptor. So at night, these birds are going to see twice as well as even our eagles and our kestrels that we talked about earlier. And I think the craziest thing about all of this is that light bulb shape of their eye isn't actually what helps with their seeing at night. It's not all of those rods. Obviously, the rods are necessary for them to see, but the thing that helps them see the best is something called a tapetum lucidum, which, if you don't know, is basically what gives animals their eye shine. So that tapetum lucidum is a tissue, but it looks like a mirror. It's incredibly reflective. Again, this is a hearsay that I have heard from many people, but that does not mean that it's correct. But you could take a single owl and put it in any one of the NFL's football stadiums, enclosed stadiums, and you could put a single candle in the center of that stadium, and that owl would be able to hunt using its eyesight throughout the entire stadium. That is how good and well adapted their eyes are to picking up even tiny amounts of light to hunt with.
That's super cool.
Yeah. Now, like I mentioned, I can go on and on and on about raptors. I would love to be able to focus in more specifically on each type in future episodes. So I think I'm going to cut myself off right there. Yeah. We learned the 3 things that make these birds important. If you are unsure if a bird is a raptor, you can look at those toes, see if they're curved, see if they have long talons. You can look at that beak, see if it has a sharp hook to it, and then you can look at the size of those eyes. If you're also unsure, just remember that these birds are going to use their feet to catch their food and to maneuver their food. So something like a crow, which has a curved beak and does have pretty good feet, still isn't going to be considered a raptor because they still use their beaks as their tools.
Or like a parrot.
Or like a parrot, exactly. They're going to use primarily their beaks as their tools.
Cool. Anything else?
No. I just want to say, though, if anybody has questions or corrections or wants to get in a long and in-depth conversation about raptors, please drop us comments. Let us know. We're always happy to continue this conversation online. So now that I have talked at length about birds today, I would love to hear what you brought to the table.
Yeah, so I thought we would tackle cryptocurrency today because it's been something over the past year especially that's been in the news and been a pretty common topic of conversation.
Yeah, it's been buzzing for a while now.
Yeah, definitely. The kind of the big surge of cryptocurrency was back at the end of last December of 2017.
Oh, really?
Yeah, there was a big spike, and a bunch of people were getting rich off of Bitcoin, and everybody thought this is the end all be all. We'll talk about that a little more about what happened in a second, though. So cryptocurrency is a digital currency that uses encryption, basically, to regulate the generation of the units of those currency and to verify the transfer of funds. And it does this operating completely independently of any central bank. So like you said, the most common of these is Bitcoin. That's kind of the one that everybody knows.
Right.
There are a variety of types of cryptocurrency, but that's kind of the most common one. Kind of a distinguishing feature I want to start with is that last part of that definition, which is operating independently from a central bank. People are probably familiar with a central bank, even though they may not know the definition. But it's an institution that's charged with regulating the size of a nation's money supply, the availability of cost and cost of credit, and the foreign exchange value of its currency. So the example in the U.S. for this would be like the Federal Reserve, better known as the Fed. Bank of England is another example of that. And the way...
I have a question. Sorry to interrupt.
No. That's what's up.
Does every country have its own central bank? Or are there countries that like band together to create one large central bank?
I think that kind of depends.
Okay.
In looking into it, it seems like every country, at least every developed nation, has their own central bank.
Okay.
But it seems like you can kind of have more than one.
That seems to defeat the purpose of a central bank.
Yeah. It gets pretty complex in some areas. It's relatively simple in the U.S. because we like the big one is the Federal Reserve.
Okay.
I say relatively because it's not actually simple, but it's relatively simple compared to some of the other things that are going on out there. These central banks are responsible. Typically, they're going to be responsible for implementing monetary policy, which is as opposed to fiscal policy, which is like the government setting taxes.
Okay.
Monetary policy is something a little bit different, and these central banks are also responsible for the regulation of member banks. That would be commercial banks that are like part of this country's economic system.
Would that be banks independent from like credit unions, or would credit unions be included in that?
I believe credit unions are. The difference there is how they're insured.
Okay.
But that's a good question. I'd have to look that up.
Check back later.
Yeah. So the way that they implement the monetary policy is basically, like, here's an example. If the economy is in a recession, which is the GDP in the U.S. is declining, the Federal Reserve will adopt an expansionary or easy money monetary policy. Basically what that does is they expand the money supply for member banks to borrow from. That loosens the credit, it lowers the interest rates, and it encourages more lending by the banks, and in turn more consumer spending.
Okay, so that's not necessarily like printing more money.
No.
Because you see those pictures from, maybe it was the First World War.
Yeah.
Where Germany just printed a bunch of money and it was essentially useless.
Yeah, no.
This is making money available for banks so that they can begin lending.
Yeah, so essentially the Federal Reserve is a bank that the other banks, the commercial banks, will borrow from.
Okay.
Hence the reserve. If so, like say we're not in a recession, to combat inflation, the Federal Reserve will adopt a restrictive or tight money monetary policy. There's a lot of different ways that this can be accomplished. One of the big ones is the discount rate, which is the interest rate that the Fed charges to commercial banks to borrow from their reserves. So it's like the interest rate that if a bank borrows from the Federal Reserve, that's the interest rate they pay, much as like the interest rate we would pay to a bank if we were using one of their lending products. Is
that how the Federal Reserve makes money? Is through the interest it's charging on banks to borrow from them?
One of the ways, yeah.
Okay.
It's also, this process is also kind of a nice alternative to raising taxes. So they're not completely independent entities, like they kind of work in parallel and you sort of have to balance them, which is really the tricky part. The discount rate, one other thing to keep in mind about the discount rate, it's kind of considered the basis for what's known as the prime rate, which is the yardstick for commercial lending rates. You hear prime rate all over the place when it comes to lending from banking institutions, and that's typically dictated by the discount rate. So that's what you need to know about this. That's basically what a central bank does.
Fast and dirty central bank definition?
Yeah. The emphasis on the fast and dirty. But it's a pretty central, pardon the pun. It's kind of a central idea to how traditionally the economic system has worked.
Okay. But that's different from Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies.
Yes. So one thing to remember too about, and one interesting thing to come up because of cryptocurrency is something called blockchain, which you're familiar with, right?
I am not, actually.
Oh, okay. So blockchain is kind of the thing that makes the exchange of cryptocurrency possible. It's a digital, decentralized public ledger of any cryptocurrency transactions for a particular cryptocurrency. It's really a key component of cryptocurrencies, and it was initially developed for Bitcoin as basically a ledger to monitor the transactions being done through Bitcoin. I'd like to revisit blockchain in a later episode, possibly with a guest who knows a little bit more about how it works than I do, because it's super complicated, and I have no idea what I'm talking about when it comes to that. But that's kind of the basic idea, and it's important to know that. There are some advantages to cryptocurrency. Because of the blockchain, it gives you additional security from hackers, because every new block generated has to be verified through the blockchain ledgers of each user on the market. It makes it almost impossible to forge transaction histories.
Oh, okay.
So that's kind of a big selling point that they've used. It does have the potential to lower transaction costs through more efficient payment processing, which makes sense. You don't have to go through an institution and pay all of their fees and percentages for a transaction to be processed. It's automatically kind of built into how the system works. And it is, it's considered, quote unquote, free from regulation from the central bank, which I guess it is free, but a lot of people consider that to be an advantage when it may not necessarily be an advantage either. Depends on who you ask. So the disadvantages to it are there's no central repository, so it can be wiped out by a computer crash if there's no backup. If you don't back up the records, the computer crashes, you lose it just like any file.
Okay.
There's anonymity, which also is kind of an advantage/disadvantage, because people like that when they're doing their transactions, it's anonymous, but it does enable things like money laundering and tax evasion a lot more easily because of that anonymous nature. The thing that I consider to be kind of and again, I'm no expert here, but the thing that I consider to be kind of the major disadvantage is it's not rooted in material goods, which I mentioned earlier. It's based solely on supply and demand. And because of that, it makes it a lot more subject to wild fluctuation. It's really, really unstable.
So, like, if everybody woke up tomorrow and there was an article on CNN or something like that that said Bitcoin sucks, and the American public was maybe impressionable to something like that, and they all pulled out of Bitcoin, which this is true of something like the stock market. If everybody pulls their money out of the stock market, it's going to crash. But if everybody decides that they don't want to buy more Bitcoin, the price could essentially drop to zero.
Yeah, I mean, it's gonna tank, and that's what you said about the stock market is correct. The thing that makes it more stable is that there's still trading of goods and services going on.
Well, right.
So it's not completely going to deflate. Whereas with the cryptocurrency, it is a lot more, like you said, it's a lot more susceptible to that, and it could completely tank because it's just based on supply and demand. A good example of that, actually, there was a huge boom in roughly the end of 2017, beginning of 2018, and then it pretty much tanked right away too, and it's been declining ever since then. There have been a couple spikes in a couple different cryptocurrencies, but for the most part, it's been declining since the end of last year. Warren Buffett, sort of the financial messiah for a lot of people, has some interesting things to say about it, which are definitely worth checking out. So I'd recommend that. But
we can include a link to some fun things that he said in the description.
While we're at it, I'd like to include a link of him playing the ukulele because he's actually pretty good at it.
Sweet.
Yeah.
You got to have hobbies.
You got to have hobbies. Yeah. It's a bit strange for a financial mogul to play the ukulele, but it's entertaining for sure. Anyway, so cryptocurrency kind of still remains a large topic of debate, but lately there have been some. It seems to be going in one particular direction, and that's down. But who knows? I mean, again, it's really unstable. It could spike again. Nobody really knows what it's going to do. So what are your thoughts? Are you going to go straight out and invest in some Bitcoin?
You know, I really love the idea of Bitcoin just because originally it was just like this thing that a bunch of really technically, I can't think of the correct way to say it, but people who are very good at technical things.
Nerds? Are you trying to say nerds?
I'm not about to call anybody a nerd. If you want to hear a fun story about Kelsey, this is a very quick aside. I was once told in high school that I was not cool enough to play D&D. So I completely understand
nerd
culture. But for lack of a better word, we can call them nerds, but technically advanced people who were just making millions upon millions upon millions in Bitcoin.
Yeah.
But then they got out.
Yeah.
They sold their Bitcoin and they own an island somewhere.
Yeah.
Where they play Dungeons and Dragons all day.
And Kelsey's not invited.
And I'm not invited.
Yeah.
You know what? It's fine.
Well,
Someday.
That brings up an interesting point, is that there's definitely a valid technology behind it in blockchain. And that's kind of the interesting part to me, is that even though cryptocurrency is seen by a lot of economists to be kind of a fad or like a bubble that's not a consistent long-term financial solution, it's probably going to be the caveat for, first of all, that the blockchain technology being used in other ways, and B, making transactions more efficient, because we're moving towards more automated financial transactions.
Which is a good thing.
It's definitely a good thing.
If it can be secured, it's a wonderful thing.
Yeah, and that's a major advantage of Bitcoin, is the security.
I don't think I'm going to go out and invest all of my money in it. I think I'm going to continue to invest in things that are rooted in goods.
Yes.
But that's maybe because I'm just a little old school.
Yeah, and that's okay. It depends. It depends on what your goals are.
Well, thank you all for listening. That's all we have for you. Remember to drop a comment or a like on Facebook or Twitter, which we'll be getting soon. We will be filling our Instagram out with pictures as soon as possible. But I'm Kelsey.
And I'm Reese.
And this has been Charismatic Megafauna.